Well, welcome back to another edition of the Pure Signal podcast here at the global headquarters of Credera. Ryan Medellin, a manager in the marketing solutions practice, focusing on MarTech and AdTech, your loyal and lovely host, as always, joined by my favorite co-host. And I don't want to, mince words here because one of our co-hosts is missing today. But we have our North America CEO, Kevin Erickson, and of course, Jake Carter, not present for this recording, and he will be missed, Kevin.
He will be missed, but he continues to demonstrate his priorities. And so, but we've got other people that we can bring in and other fun. And Ryan, I'm so thankful that, we do show up consistently at this podcast. And thank you so much for making sure that happens.
We've had so many wonderful guests on this year to give their perspectives. And today, no different, as we welcome into the Pure Signal podcast, Scott Hensley. Scott, it's great to have you. Thank you for joining us. And I know we tried to get this done in person, but happy to have you on our broadcasting link, and would love for you just to give a quick introduction of yourself and what you do for Credera and, just why you're here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ryan. And excited to be with you guys this morning. I think this is my podcast debut, so I am certainly excited about that. But as you said, Scott Hensley, Chief Revenue Officer for Credera in North America. So I lead all of our sales and go-to-market efforts, really partnering with our client teams and our industry leads to make sure that the services we're delivering, sort of the solutions we provide to the marketplace, really still resonate and are delivering value for our clients. So really excited to be with you. And I wish we could have got it done in Raleigh. It would have, and maybe we'll have to get you back out here next time. I think the food and sort of fellowship that we had was really great this week, and we'll have to get you out here with the team next time. So.
Yeah, we learned some important things. We learned that Scott is a tobacco farmer. I didn't know that, and we saw the process at play on his land, and that was pretty amazing, or near his land, I should say. That was kind of cool to see that. And he's a fisherman. He is a Sprinter van aficionado, but prefers it without air conditioning. And that we've also learned that he likes airports that get shut down for like days because of lightning. And so, but what Scott say, we also learned that Raleigh is the biscuit capital of the world. And that was pretty amazing. And actually we had a really fun time. In all seriousness, we had a chance to, as we are kind of at a midpoint in the summer, and even some of our topics for today, like, we're start of a quarter, start of the back half of the year. We had a chance for the North America leadership team to get together, and we decided to do that in Raleigh, where Scott is located, and had a chance to do that. And it was a really great time of just thinking and planning. And Scott, I'm so excited that he's joining. Scott is having just an amazing impact for our clients and for our teams, and just and really it just came back from France, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. But just really love how he's thinking about how. Not only are we just serving our clients, but in general, what's going on in the world. And so that is why we were there. And I hope that we get back. And we'll see, Ryan, if you make the cut. I'm not certain if you will. You've made a lot of cuts this past year, so it's possible.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up because, kind of the genesis, talking about being at the midway point of the year and the start of a new quarter, when you look at, when this podcast, when the new iteration of it had started, had the opportunity to go to reInvent late last year. Then we kicked off this year at CES. Obviously, Adobe Summit happened, and then we made an appearance there. And then, off of the Cannes in France, it's been a lot of hearing what the industry is expecting and then also doing and where it's going. And so, I think the genesis of this episode is essentially a check-in point of, hey, we're halfway through the year. We heard a lot of things at these various conferences of what this year could look like. And so we want to spend some time if that's coming to fruition, but we also want to, like, on the back half say, like, hey, where are things going for the rest of the year? And then how are, in these offsites that leadership are having and starting to kick up right now at the midway point as they look towards 2027, where is budget going? Where are thoughts going? What is going to happen? Because I feel like, it's a chance to take a breath real quick. A quick pause.
I agree. And so, I mean, I'm not going to kick us off, but I'm going to turn it over to Scott here. But I just want to maybe a little slightly different take, because I think that the events that we were referencing are good checkpoints of time. But Scott, obviously you are part of your job put you think like you're always out there thinking about what's next for our teams and our clients, and that's kind of how you and I work together. And so I would love for you just to kind of maybe start with some of your just general, reflections of what you thought going into the year, how that would play into that. Now that may tie back to some of the events and places that we're out we're dealing with our customers, but just kind of maybe start there a little more broader, and then Ryan, I'm curious to your perspective, because I think it's been an interesting year. I'll get into mine, but it's been a really fast changing year in my opinion. What we're thinking about today, I think, was different than what we were thinking about in Q4 planning for 2026. But Scott, I'd love to think about kind of how you're seeing the landscape a little bit from your vantage point.
Yeah, I think the thing that was so interesting, I've sort of rewind the clock back to, even December, the reinvent timeline, kind of what you were describing. I think the conversations we were having with clients, I mean, Kevin, you and I sat in a room with the CEO of an auto manufacturer, right? And like the conversation was about efficiency, right? The conversation was about how can we use AI and really to sort of accelerate or sort of drive efficiency in the way they work. I think we really pressured that sentiment at the time, that it wasn't about efficiency. It's about how you change the customer experience, how you use it as a tool for growth, right? And I think we were saying that, again, 6-7 months ago. And I think even just sort of as I sort of fast forward through the last 7 months, I think we're actually seeing that come to fruition. I think it's the conversations are less about efficiency. They're more about growth. They're about scale. They're about how we, really consider the change of how an organization is sort of structured around these tools and the technology as it continues to advance. So I think for me, maybe the thing I'm most intrigued by is the pace of change. And again, that's probably cliche to say, but it is moving so fast. I think, even on a personal level, trying to keep pace with the tools and what, how quickly they evolve. I think one of our other North America LT members said that he likes to party, so he was watching the Claude YouTube channel this week, and it was just sort of like that was the highlight of just seeing what a year of Claude and how it had evolved. And I'm not sure I have done the same subscription, but maybe I need to, just to sort of keep pace. But yeah, I think that's really an interesting thing, just to see how fast it's evolving. How are you kind of keeping yourself sharp as the tools continue to sort of mature and develop? And then even just, again, what the clients are asking of us, I think it's evolving rapidly, right? And I think we're seeing that in the types of work we're delivering. And so trying to stay ahead of that is really, really critical.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting, just to continue to build on that, definitely think it was more efficiency working through that. You were talking about use cases. Those are things we were talking about a year ago, 6 months ago. And we just, even if we go before what our clients are thinking, you go back at the macro stage right now, we're talking about power consumption. We're talking about ethics. We're talking about elements of that. We're talking about who and what would look like that. I think that kind of works its way down. I mean, even now at the state level, right? I mean, we saw another example this week of states that are choosing to opt in and out of like power consumption. And we were working with another one of our client teams who's very actively engaged in the process of helping support creating power consumption and capability for data centers, and working with the leading hyperscalers on that. And it's just a fascinating world right now of who's choosing to invest. Where does that look like? How does that go from a company financing normal capital markets? How does that play into the geopolitical side of that equation? Then we bring it back down to our customers. They're asking questions now of, okay, where is the cost efficacy of that? Where are we getting the return for that? Are we spending too much? I mean, we're seeing that even internally, how we use it here in terms of what that cost element. You've got some of our competitors who are taking huge write-offs right now. And so it's a really, not surprisingly, in some ways, I thought this year would be a bit more clarifying, that people, hey, we're going to work these elements. We're going to continue to build through this. We're going to be talking about wholesale process changes, agentic workflow. I mean, all that's what I thought we would be in, and we're definitely seeing progress on that. But what you're seeing now is you're seeing the whole ecosystem, kind of come in at each other, different approaches to the same problem. And, it's almost everyone's kind of hawking their own way to do that across companies that are probably well-positioned to win, some that are not, and the ones that are not are like doing Hail Marys left and right, trying to make sure they stay relevant. You've got obviously the I mean, just even who would have thought 6 months ago that you'd have OpenAI openly courting government ownership and part of their, it's a really fascinating world to see them come in. And so then we come back to how do we help our clients? And again, where I keep on going to, and it's a not my natural state, as you guys both know, in this sense, is that I'm finding myself increasingly becoming more myopic of like, make small incremental investments of things that are not going to necessarily get wiped away, because there's a lot of things that we can't control that have to kind of flush out, but we have a lot of things we can do in the incremental or the baffles or whatever you want to be able to use that. But then I think it also comes back to, Scott, one of the things that I think is this has been a theme for the last 36 months, but your own personal use case. I mean, again, we're having a chance, Ryan, Scott and I've been spending time doing a lot of things with the QBRs, and I'm seeing the amount of just amazing work that our client teams and our growth areas are using tools. And, again, we try to take the best of everywhere and put them into solutions. But I mean, it's just, we're seeing, I think now we're at a new genesis, at least for us internally with our clients and our teams, that you're seeing great amplification of impact. And now we got to go back and help, refine that into, where do we get the best? How do we make sure we're doing it cost effective, which is really what I think a lot of our clients are asking. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm seeing the money now. And so that is a little bit of like where I think, and it's actually a really fun time, but it's also a different type of confusing time as we're at the midpoint. And, the last thing I'll just say, and not to continue to talk about just kind of where I also think that, and this may be a bit too personal or biographical, but I'm feeling it with our clients. I'm definitely feeling it with our teams. I think there's a lot of uncertainty fatigue right now across a lot of different areas, where it's just what's changing, what's doing through that, what does that mean? We've had, and so, and I don't know what I think that's going to be, how do we continue to help advise our clients and our teams and as we get in, really hopefully get some summer break, get some re-energy, and then, come out, hit it hard for the fall. But
yeah, I think, and I would love to kind of start, as we kind of get into the topics of today from Scott and Kevin, your perspective, because, I've always talked about like what my unique role is in this podcast of, I'm working with a lot of leadership folks, and then here I am kind of in the day-to-day delivery project work and seeing it kind of come to fruition of what's happening from like a day-to-day standpoint. And it's very interesting to me because I know we talked at the beginning of the year that like, the MVPs are the pilots. It's the year of the pilot, right? Like we don't want to do this MVP. We want to start piloting and getting performance results ASAP. And, as those had spun up at the beginning of the year and in the work that I'm doing, what we're seeing now at this midway point is that the designs of these pilots and the designs of these models intended to create those efficiencies and create those workflows that these companies want. Right now, at this point, we're starting to see it's not working the way we want it to. And we need to not necessarily restart, but start to really kind of retrace our steps and figure out what we can do different to kind of get the outcome that we want. Yeah. And so I want to know if y'all are seeing the same type of thing, because everybody, again, to the pacing point, Scott, everybody was trying to move so fast to get in the AI space and start building those efficiencies. But I think now companies are having to take a little bit of a step back and say, okay, we went really fast. We weren't getting the desired results that we wanted. And now we need to kind of reshape how we're going to do it.
Yeah, well, and I definitely want to get your thoughts on this, Scott, but something I'll add to that, Ryan, is that I think, and it's part of the nature of it's amazing about where we're at in this moment in time in history. But also the concern is that because the tooling and the processing does so much of it kind of in a black box, and it goes so fast and so far that like you don't even actually know really what's outcomes are happening, right? And it's not like there's some guru behind the scenes that knows what it is. It's really being being done through all different types of modeling and learnings. And so then that's why I think the cost structure is coming in, because you're saying I can't necessarily measure success. I don't know if it's really improved my efficiency. The bean counters are coming in now and saying, well, I'm seeing how much it's costing me in the back end. I'm seeing this consumption usage, this token usage, and we're trying to figure out even what that means in terms of marketplace valuation. But so now you're kind of seeing this, and then you bring in the government side of that too, and the social side of it. So it's going to be. It is like, so I do think what you're saying, at least from I do think there is going to be a bit of pause for some companies. They're going to be a little bit learning. I think there's going to be others that are probably going to go very fast. And I think this might be a world where, we might see us, going back into other technical advancements where some of the more startup-y, more focused elements might have a leg up because, their institutional risk of sorts to be able to go and very aggressively ahead is just lower. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing. And then again, the last thing I'll say is, and going back to, we talked about the IPOs a little bit, but you still have, you've had a tremendous growth quarter that's being fueled by just a handful of companies. And it could be, I was reading something that came up through last night. It was an editorial, but it was, Ken Griffin was talking about some of the risk of like literally if China blockades, Taiwan, it would reduce the chips coming across, like what that would be the impact for the GDP. I mean, it's just like you're fascinated. Like that's on the bingo card of things that can happen. Yeah. And so it's like, and it's like, so that's the part where I get generally very optimistic and very excited, but man, it's a complex world right now. That's why Scott, though, he's got all the answers. He's sitting in Raleigh. He's been figuring it out. He knows he's going to provide clarity for all of our listeners and for you and I, Ryan. I can't wait to hear you.
Yeah.
The one thing that I think is interesting, and it's probably very much akin to what you said, Ryan, I think a lot of the natural reaction was to take processes as they existed and to just sort of plug them into the tools and just sort of run them automated through the platforms, through the different sort of tools that exist. I think that's the wrong approach, and I think that's what we're seeing. And I think that's consistent with what you're just describing, right? Was we actually should have stepped back. We should have redesigned the entire process. We should have rethought about the entire process from the ground up in the context of AI. Why are we doing the process at all, right? What is the fundamental sort of perspective? So I don't know, we've been sort of tossing this around, right, of like this workflow redesign kind of imperative, right? That's what exists, that's what's required. I don't think you can just sort of throw those legacy processes into the platforms and expect it to handle it. I think you have to take a step back and sort of rethink it all the way through. And so I think that's part of what we're training our people on. I mean, Kevin, we've talked a lot about this, right, in terms of what are the skills that are required in this age, right? What do we need our people to be capable of delivering? And then, I think when we talk to clients, it's the same thing, right? We're actually saying, hey, don't just try to take a crappy process and plug it in, right? Because you're going to get the same results, right? We need to actually take a step back. We need to rethink about this. And then ultimately we will find you'll get the value from it if you can actually redesign the process altogether. So I hope that's consistent, Ryan, with what you're describing, but I think that's really what we've been seeing kind of more holistically across our client set and across the things that we've been talking through.
Yeah. And the best way I can describe it, and Kevin, you've heard me mention this 100 times, but I really think it's the best way. And I actually saw this in practice this week because I'm in a neighborhood right now where I live here in Dallas, Texas, where every house that is getting sold is torn down and new little mega mansions are getting built, right? And there's two types of builders out there, ones who want to move really fast. And so what they'll do is they'll take a 2,500 square foot, 1-story house and then build a 2-story, 5,000 square foot house on top of that original foundation, saving them months of foundation work and repouring and treating the ground. And then you have the others that are actually going through and ripping out that foundation. Well, one of the first houses that got rebuilt on our block, I kid you not, this week, they used the same foundation. There were 30 tunnels underneath that house going in and putting in piers and redoing the foundation because they didn't take that time up front to do that. And I think, Scott, to your point of like taking not ideal processes and trying to just plug in the new fun stuff into those not ideal processes, that's where the growing pains come on, and you'll see those surface later on. And so I like using that analogy because I think it really helps make it very simple of like, there is a foundation that has to be in place. And I would say 95% of the work that I'm doing or advising clients on is like, look, I know you want all of these really cool things, but we need to take a look at the underlying inputs into those things and make sure that they are properly structured and in a place where they can be a proper input for those models.
Yeah. But, we're talking a chief revenue officer. So, and this is somewhat joking, but somewhat serious. Like, so you think about that scenario, I think it's really about what's the incentives, because it could have been, hey, I was able to get it done faster, and then I could plug in a future BD opportunity for going back and doing the peers, right? I mean, again, you like to think that doesn't happen, but that's not, that isn't, like, that's the trade-off that you're seeing, speed versus that. But there is a little bit of a cynic that also says, okay, at some point we're going to have to go back and invest in this. And this is a problem that's not just driven by AI. I mean, this is a problem for all of our time, right? I mean, we spent the bulk of our time working with clients, helping people understand the costs associated with the unsexy things that are required to be able to build that. But I think it is a little bit also just part of our time of like instant gratification. Well, I want my 5,000 square foot house, and I'll make it someone else's problem to deal with the peers. And so I that's a really interesting element. I mean, I find myself really talking about, going back to the conversation Scott was referencing about the CEO that we were working with earlier in the year. And one thing I really appreciated about that, the perspective that was in that conversation, is I felt like that was actually a really healthy short-term and long-term discussion. We were bringing both themes into that, and I felt like, and it was a relatively new CEO in the position, and I just appreciated that he could blend that, because right now I feel like, because things are changing so fast, because the expectations are so rising so quickly, that for many, you're having to make short-term trade-off decisions to work through that. And then you've got others that either have more of a balanced view or a better protection, that they can play the longer game. But then again, also we've talked, going back to the same scenario, even though you can make the short, long term, one that was really kind of crystallizing for us in that conversation was that there was a very clear business objective that was the anchor that was driving all the investments in marketing, costs, AI, and elements of that. And I think that's what when I keep on going back to our clients, it goes back to, it's a different way of saying the same thing I said earlier, like, hey, focus on incremental growth. If you can have some really true north, or really, hey, this, regardless of all this change, this one is not going to change. This is our core customer group. This is our core team. This is our core people. You can kind of weather the storm of all the noise. And I think, again, you're pure signal, so we're trying to provide clarity within that noise. You can weather a lot of the noise that's going around you if you can anchor to things that are going to be somewhat timeless.
Yeah. Scott, I would love to, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but if not, I would love to kind of talk about, as you've been on the conference circuit this year and just coming back from Cannes, what are people saying the same types of things that we're discussing here? What are some other things that you have heard or seen that have taken interest for you as we kind of look at this first half of the year and where things are headed?
Yeah, maybe let's talk about Cannes for a second. I think, Ryan, it's an interesting phenomenon. Kevin and I spent a lot of time chatting about it the last couple of weeks, right? I mean, it's the advertising festival, right? Like, sort of all centered on creativity. And this was my first time going. So, obviously I got a bit of a history lesson from the folks that had been there in the past, but there's been a series of sort of shifts over time, right? Since its inception, right? Originally it was all, truly the creatives and the agencies. Then you get to the media, and I think there was a media era, right? Where, the media agencies came in and were really the big spenders, and then now you've got that, the tech platforms, really were the ones that were spending the last several years, the Adobes, the Salesforce of the world. And then I think, what you're seeing now is sort of the sort of broadening of that into the hyperscalers and the pieces that, we talked about. AWS was obviously there in a big way, and as was GCP. And so, I think that's what you're seeing, right? And what was interesting in the conversations, right, is that these things are, they're inexplicably linked now, right? Like the creativity with the tech, the marketing and tech. I mean, it's not going away. That link is there. And I think, it's really interesting to see. Obviously, our parent company is also sort of at an inflection point, right? Where we've made a pretty significant acquisition, sort of formatting and sort of rearranging for the marketplace. Like, we're trying to address the challenges head on that are sort of existing in that marketplace. So how all these things come together was really, really fascinating for me. Maybe one other kind of interesting takeaway, Ryan, was, and this was probably going back more into the creativity side of it, but AI as a villain is sort of was one of the themes, right? And again, I see that as an opportunity for us, right? Again, that's my role, but this sort of idea that, lots of ads that we're winning in Cannes, right? And obviously it's an awards festival. Like, a lot of the awards that we're winning because they were portraying AI as a villain, right? And that's because that is really much or very much aligned to consumer sentiment around AI, especially when you get into different generations, right? Gen Z very much, and you saw this with all the way they responded to all of the commencement speeches, right? The ones that were written with AI is like, you're getting booed off the stage if you wrote it. And so like the same sentiment was present in those advertisements. I think that's really interesting for us, right? Because we have to change consumer sentiment, right? Like our role is to sort of help bring people along on that adoption journey. And that's not just consumers, that's employees who are being forced to leverage these tools, right? And so, I don't know, there was lots of really interesting conversations. I think lots of really interesting observations, but that probably was the one to me that stuck out more than anything, right? Was this sort of unique opportunity for us to sort of try to, really just take the stigma out of it, if you will.
Yeah, it's super interesting you bring that up, just because when I look at kind of every, proposal that I've seen this year, or every plan that I've seen this year, especially from a marketing and advertising perspective, which is where I spend most of my time, the number one goal is improve customer experience and do it at scale, right? Like, I think having that, like, the stories about like fast food chains using AI to take your order, and the horror stories that have come up from that, and those types of things are the ones making the headlines. And so a lot of these companies are trying to, de-vilify the usage of AI, saying like, no, it's not going to take over the world. It's actually going to help you have a better experience with our brand, and try and create human connection by using technology when losing a lot of the actual human connection that most people are comfortable with.
Yeah. Well, and I think to that end, it's how do you do that, right? Part of it is education, but then the other aspect of it for me, Ryan, would be when you don't even know that the tool you're interacting with, right, or the experience you're having is actually fueled by AI, right? So how do you make it so seamless that you don't even realize that it's AI on the other end? I think a lot of those examples you described were ones where it had gone off the rails, right? And so this is so much of how, our technologists and our people are sort of, how do we build the right controls, the right governance, the right guardrails? Those are all the conversations. I feel like, Kevin, we're in those conversations every single day, right? How do we protect the systems and build the systems in such a way that the end user doesn't even realize they're interacting with AI, right? And I think that's a real challenge.
Right. Well, I think so this is where it's interesting, where I do think you start to find solace or peace or whatever word you want to use in the context of you do look back, and it does come back to become an efficiency play. So if we look and say, yeah, hey, we're going to vilify AI in terms of either the creative process and how that shortchanges that, or the costs associated with that when it comes to the different elements of that. Well, then maybe that takes a little bit of a cautionary moment, but then we can go back to efficiency. I'm just going back into a very recency bias of what we've done in the last 3 or 4 days. You're seeing, we're getting access to data faster. We're getting access to different insights that we didn't have, right? I'm not taking that necessarily to go and pitch that this afternoon to a client, but I'm able to run our business better. And I know that our teams are through faster. And so if we can train people how to do that, and so that's where I think it goes. I think it went poof, right? In the sense like this year, it blew up in the context of how fast, because you're getting smarter. So now you're really seeing, oh my goodness. And now it's like, I get, this is a little bit of an aside, but this happened to me 2 weeks ago, where literally I'm reviewing an RFP that was like, they didn't take enough time to literally even take it off our, kind of the classical kind of the way that, the default way that, to pick your model comes back with a response. I'm like, at least have enough, ability to take that and put it into your own Word doc and change the formatting. But I mean, literally it was exactly the same format, let alone, or better yet, have your model that you would use to create that, be able to put it into the template you want. So my response to that was like, well, if you're going to, this is how much energy you've put into this RFP. And because now you can have it generated by AI, you can have it be, you're asking me 1,000 extra questions. Well, I think it's going to be companies like us or clients where you're going to come back and you're going to start to react to that negatively. And that's going to take some time to sort out. But I do think, going back to how we can help our clients and help ourselves, is just, it is going back and actually, clearly there needs to be more consistent training associated with new processes and new domains, as Scott mentioned that a second ago. And I think it's not so much like what we were saying 6 months ago, or even a year and 18 months ago. We got training, people got to go do all this stuff, and it was they were still going back to individualistically doing trainings and learnings, opposed to, like, for us, the question that's keeping me up at night is not up at night, but like what is this? How does this change our methodology? So if I'm talking about Scott, how are we using tools to make us have better and more personal and more successfully driven responses to customer inquiries? How are you in your day job, Ryan, saying, how are you taking these tools to have more consistent delivery outcomes, better outcomes, faster solutions? How do we taking in what would be a normal project, and not so much just speeding it up, but having it be better and more outcomes? So then we can get to the better questions. Like, that's what gets me so excited, is that I think we're going to continue as we mature. A lot of the stuff that was, and I mean, this has been this technology advancement for the start of time, right? Is that, you end up keep on operationalizing muscle memory, the stuff that used to take a lot of time. And I think if we can now, the back half of this year, continue to make muscle memory things that allow us to get to the next frontier of thinking and decision making, and clients working through that, like, it's really exciting to me. And I think, and I'm actually really hopeful that we're going to be able to do that, how we do that at scale. And hopefully we don't have so much noise. I mean, there's so much noise going on right now, but maybe that can be worked through that.
But yeah, I think to me, like, when I'm hearing all these things from you, Scott, and then from Kevin as well, like, all I can think about in my head is the Amazon last mile, right? Like, it's the hardest part of the entire process, is that last mile of getting the package to the door, right? And all the amount of money and time spent on everything that has to take place to get that package in the truck to do the last mile. And that last mile is where it can all go wrong, right? That's where the customer experience really kind of comes into play of getting it to your door. And so when I hear these things about, like, ensuring that we still have the connection to the customers, and ensuring that, like, people aren't feeling like they're dealing with AI, even though the whole process is AI, except for this one piece that matters most to the customer, that's where my head goes.
Yeah. Well, and this is where I think that it's going to be continuing how we take and build the technology changes, and we add. This is where I think a firm like ours and our parent company, we can actually really challenge. I'll give you an example. Like, I want you as an example of ordering. We joke with Scott. I joke. We like some certain restaurants. So okay, so Scott goes to his favorite burger place, pizza place, whatever else at a certain time at night, and it's using some kind of algorithm that says, well, this is what it is. I can see this element of that. I'm going to go and I'm going to order him a Big Mac. It's like, or Scott goes to the same place, or I'll use me. I don't frequent a ton of fast food restaurants, or quick service, but like when I do, I pretty much order their, like, 99% the same thing every single time. And so, like, I don't need to have an AI model to say, based on my age, demographic, this element, literally just, like, know what I order and have it ready. Like, if you could come up and say, hey, Mr. Whatever, you order this 99% times when you're here across our ecosystem. How about you? Would you like that? Yes, I would. So again, that's a blending of AI and model and personalization and kind of working through that. And so I think those silly use cases right now, where I think, trying to do the pure predictive, because this is where, I'm in Texas, so I say this in the context that I'm, pretty open-minded to a lot of different components of the elements, but there is some truth to the cost of the models that we're doing, right? I mean, if everything is an open-ended query, I mean, and again, I'm not using the technical terms of this, like, that's silly. We have to be wiser in how that plays into it, and again, because of this, the way it works right now, you don't have to put those government, those constraints in. And so I think we have to continue to help our clients, how you blend through that. How do you make the story personal? How do you also use some of the outside perspectives? How do you still do the right way to do an influence type or a suggestion query that makes someone think outside of their normal? I mean, all those things are really important. And I think that firms like ours and people, I mean, that's the part that gets really excited. Yeah, I mean, keep on going back to the conversation that Scott referenced. I mean, the basic, simple, I've said this so much the last 6-7 months. Like, I love the simplicity of the ask. I want to sell more X. I want to push more Y. I want to have my employees feel more engaged and more. I mean, those are timeless things that are the start of everything that every company exists, and we can continue to, focus on those things, and we're going to get the ball down the field a little bit more.
we've spent a lot of time talking about what we've seen and kind of where things we feel like are headed. But, what are, if you could, just in your final thoughts here, just give us kind of like 3 things you're watching for the back half of the year and kind of headed towards 2027 in regards to what we've been talking about today.
Yeah, I think the first one, Ryan, is and maybe this is buzzwordy, but I think we're sort of seeing it play out in real time. This concept of the agentic operating model, and I know you guys had Aaron Grotzinger on a previous episode, sort of talking about some of this as well, right? But I think that concept is real. I think that concept, we are seeing it play out. Certainly in a marketing context, given where a lot of our clients sit. But I think, Kevin has said this many times, like operating models will exist outside of marketing. They will exist across they will exist in many different facets of the business, right? I mean, there's one in supply chain, there's one in customer experience, it's all over, right? And so how those things come together and how human and agent sort of interact and the sort of the interplay between those two things, I think is really a big part of it. And so I think that kind of continued maturation, Ryan, is probably the single most thing I'm interested in. Again, we're seeing this, like the role we play in that. I think the other piece that I'm really interested in is, again, part of this comes back to capabilities we're adding. So it's a little bit of bias in this, right? But the change management capabilities that we have added, right? The sort of the human coaching, human-centered coaching or adult learning pieces, Kevin, that we were talking about that a little bit. Like, to me, it's, again, how do you stay kind of current with the time? How do you stay relevant? How do you stay in your own way? Like, we have that same opportunity with clients and their employees to sort of offer those same types of things. And I think there's going to be a huge need for that. So I am really interested in where we can play a role in that. And I think that feels like a huge area of demand for me and a huge area of opportunity where I think it's often an afterthought, right? It's so often the last thing people want to engage in. And so for me, that's a huge, trend as well. And then, I think coming back, Ryan, to what I said on the AI being vilified, like maybe 2 and 3 are tied together. But I for one, I'm so intrigued by the tools personally. So when I think about my own personal sort of growth story, and my wife has a business, and Kevin knows this about me. We got a big family. Like I'm so intrigued by how it can make my own life, more efficient. And so I am, I'm so intrigued by that to sort of figure out how those things continue to come together. And so this idea that it's vilified in other parts of society, I'm like, how do we demystify that? How do we de-vilify to the point you made, Ryan? I think is really an interesting thing that I want to keep an eye on. And I have to think there's huge opportunity to sort of make movement on that in the rest of the year.
Kevin, 3 things that you're looking for?
I don't know what I'm looking for, but maybe an element that where I'm at and is, before, I do think that the pace has been really fast, and things scaling. So I think that I think there's a bit of like, in general, I think this is me, our company, I think our clients, a little bit of a chance to maybe, hey, let's slow the roll a little bit. Let's be restored. Let's kind of think through that. Some of these elements of that, I think it really are kind of important. Kind of going back to the basics again. I've just been. Just even some of the elements of, because change has occurred so fast, because gratification is so demand, like, how do you get back to what is growth, what is effort, what is, hardship? I mean, there's some bigger things going on around, like, and just in society right now, but I've been, personally, I'm kind of headed into some, kind of just hopefully a little bit PTO at the back half of the month. And, but I've been reading a couple different things right now, and I've been really kind of encouraging me, but you're just kind of looking back more at where has society evolved and what is the source of truth. And that's an individual question. People pursue that, companies pursue that. So I'm not, I don't have any answers on that, but to me, this kind of going back to like, hey, what is the things that are most important? And I think, so when it comes back to me personally, I think it's, I want to lead well. I want to care for our people. I want to care for our clients. I want to be able to make wise choices and recommendations that can really help people. I want to help provide clarity. I think these are the reasons why I'm a consultant. There's a reason why I love what I get to do in my day job. And I think that some of that is you got to make sure that you've got some of those things internally. And so I think one of my learnings, the three things, is one is, hey, make sure you're investing in some of that growth yourself. Some of that could be how to use tools better, how much reading, how much make sure you're grounded appropriately. Yeah. Also, how do you know what your limits are? I think that's one of the questions that generally companies are asking this, society's asking that we get individually. Number two, what are our limits? Which I think even a little bit of element of what I think was interesting at Cannes, or just even taking the premise we were talking about, like, hey, here's 12 months of industry trade shows. And I'm like, I think that there's a bit more of like, as we've seen, each one has become a little less selly, a little bit more relational, a little bit more, hey, talking about real problems versus features, maybe even a little bit at Cannes, and it's the nature of that one too, maybe a little bit more celebratory, right? Clients don't want to talk to people and vendors. They want to talk to people. They want to have experiences. And I think that's a really good thing for society. I mean, I think that, I think there's a moment of like, hey, it's just got we'll do pop culture. I'll keep it up. Like there's, the whole Ready Player One, that idea of like get off the grid and actually smell the flowers a little bit, right? And I think that there's, the summer's a great opportunity to do that, right? It's one of the things I love about new beginnings is they have a chance to do it. So I think that in the world that things are going so crazy, and all the world, the things that you don't like, maybe just have a chance to kind of step back, because I think you're going to have greater clarity when it comes to how you run your business, how you run your life, how you run our clients. And so that's what I'm kind of hoping for. And I think that this many years goes differently than you anticipate. That's why you plan, forecast, and you adjust. And I think the back half of this year is going to be a chance for people to find those moments that can really make impact. And the ones that are going to be more successful are going to be a little bit more focused, I think, than just broad strokes.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point about the people aspect coming off the heels of the World Cup, like, all this tension going on in the world, and then now all these folks are coming into Dallas and the various parts of the United States, and everybody's having a blast. Everybody's enjoying and realizing that, hey, maybe when you get offline for a little bit, the real world is not as scary as it's made out to be on social media all the time. So I like that point there, Kevin. I couldn't have said it better myself between the 6 things that you both called out. So I'm not going to try. But Scott, I imagine this will be the first of many times we'd love to have you on the Pure Signal podcast to let us know what's going on from your view, and really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully I Wally Pip Jake, if that's how that works.
Jake's, his attendance is pretty spotty, so, that might be a low bar, but he does bring the A game when he comes, but, you did great. So maybe we'll have to just we can have a little bit of rotating co-host maybe.
Yeah. We have 4 mics, and anytime you're in town, obviously, Scott, the door is open for you to join us here on Pure Signal. Well, for myself, Ryan, for Kevin, for our guest, Scott, this has been another amazing edition of the Pure Signal podcast, reminding you to be bold. And I'll just say it this time, Kevin, be curious. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.